I'm very excited that this day has finally arrived. I'm excited to be able to reveal to Geoff what I've discovered about the Brown family. But before I start, I have to take a moment at this time and say that there's no way that I can present everything that I've learned about the Brown family in this 1 hour. My goal is to tell the story of the Browns as clearly and concisely as possible, all the while providing tools and tips so that all genealogists will be able to help break down their own brick walls. Also, I want to mention that this case is based all on indirect evidence, and I'll explain in just a second what that is. There's no one document that definitively links Nathan Brown to his parents. So for instance, an example of direct evidence would be a birth record that would link a child to its parents. An example of indirect evidence would be proving another child in the family through a birth record or some other document, and then proving a link between the sibling and the one that doesn't have a birth record. And in that way, you're kind of making indirect links. Maybe that's a confusing example, but I hope that gives you a better idea of indirect evidence. So because this talk is based on indirect evidence, you're going to have to let me know at the end of the talk whether I've convinced you or not. So who were Nathan Brown's parents? At long last, we are going to break down Geoff's brick wall. I like to lay out right at the front what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about techniques for solving brick walls. We're going to prove how to prove your brick wall has really tumbled down, and then we're going to reveal Geoff's amazing ancestry. Now I'm going to go fairly quickly through the first part because I want to make sure that I have enough time for the second part, because that's the real meat of how I broke this mystery. So the first thing you want to do with brick walls is to review your documentation. Sometimes you do research, collect a lot of information, and then you put it away for a while. It's good to pick it up, read it again. What does it tell you? Are there gaps that you can find in your research? Are there other possibilities that you haven't considered? Now, as Geoff mentioned earlier, he sent me as much information as he had about Nathan Brown, and he also sent me some information about 2 of Nathan's children. I went through all the documentation that Geoff gave me, and the information about Nathan particularly referred to Connecticut and Charlton, Massachusetts, and what he gave me was very thorough. There didn't seem to be any gaps in his Connecticut research, but he wanted me to help him try and find more information about Nathan's Connecticut relatives. But from reviewing his information, I was able to determine there probably wasn't any more information to be had. And sometimes that's the clue that you have to come up with. You have to say, well, I'm at a dead end here. I need to be looking someplace else. This is a little screen similar to what Geoff showed you earlier of the Nathan Brown family. So even though Geoff's information about Nathan Brown in Connecticut and Charlton, Mass. was thorough, there are still gaps in his information. So if you look here, you'll notice that there are no death dates for the children. Allinson Brown, Frank Brown, Ruth Brown, Charles Brown, he has it listed as they died sometime after 1810. So there's room for further discovery there. Also, what happened to Nathan and Polly, or Molly? She's called 2 different names after 1810. That's a gap in information that we'd really like to uncover. So what we're going to do right now is focus on Windham, Connecticut, which you see, Pomfret and Woodstock, which are in Windham County, Connecticut. Pomfret is where Molly and Nathan got married. Woodstock is where they settled after their marriage. And then we're going to be talking about Charlton, Mass., where they moved to around 1799. Next thing I'd like you to do with your brick wall is to consider geography. Does your target town sit on a county or state border? Are there known historical movement or migration patterns among the places in the region you're looking at? Now here's a map showing Woodstock, Connecticut. There's a little star there. It's in the bottom half of your screen, and then Charlton, Massachusetts. Now what you discover is even though these two places are in different states, they're very close together. The pink line that you see is the Massachusetts state border. The yellow line is the Connecticut state border. You'll also notice a green line. That is the Rhode Island state border. So right here where Nathan Brown's family is living, it's at the border of 3 states. This is one of the main reasons when I didn't find any further information about Nathan Brown's family, I knew he was no longer in Connecticut. Sometimes you have to understand the region that your ancestors were in so that you can interpret where to go next. Another thing you might want to consider too is border changes. Sometimes your ancestor could live near a border and they might not move at all, but the border itself might move. And that has happened a lot with Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Another great idea, and I like to do this myself, is when you have a brick wall, discuss it with a friend. One of the best things you can do is to just talk it out. You can talk with somebody who is a genealogist, somebody who's a professional genealogist, or somebody who knows nothing about genealogy, because they're going to hear what you're saying and it's either going to make sense to them or it's not. And then they're going to start asking you questions. Based on the questions that they're asking you, that might give you ideas for where you should go with your research. And it's also going to provide you with an objective point of view. So that's a very helpful thing that you can do. Third thing to do, and I really like to do this a lot with brick walls. I have my own brick wall that I can't solve, and that is community analysis. Okay, so Nathan Brown moved from Woodstock, Connecticut to Charlton, Mass. After I'd given up on Connecticut, I had to say, well, why did Nathan Brown move to Charlton, Mass? One of the first things I wanted to look at was, well, are there other Browns in Charlton, Mass? Is there a family connection? Was he returning to Charlton, Mass, because that's where family lived? And one of the quick ways that you can do this is to use census records to scan data to see whether you should do further research or not. So for example, Nathan Brown was in Charlton by 1799, so I looked at an 1800 census. I searched by Browns in Charlton, Massachusetts, and there are 7 families there. Now the one with the arrow is Nathan Brown's family. There are 2 adults over 25 and 4 children. That matches really well with what we know about the family. But there are all these other families there. There's even another Nathan Brown. Well, that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. It could be a cousin. That's very common to find that sort of thing. Another thing I like to look at is generational similarities. Are there other people about the same age? And are there other people who are older, you know, kind of showing siblings and parent relationships? And we do see that here. There are some good possibilities. So I saw this and I said, wow, there's some opportunity here that maybe Nathan Brown is related to these Browns. And so this was good for further consideration. I was worth looking at more information on this family. So the next thing I did was, again, I did another index search on ancestry.com looking at probate records. Now this time what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to establish if there's possibly parents for Nathan Brown that I could find wills for that could establish his relationship, father-son relationship. Okay, so I scanned the dates and I found an Alexander Brown who has a will there about 1801 and a David Brown who is also 1801 in Charlton. Now if you look at the other dates, we've got 1826, 1846, 1837. Well, that's nice information, but unfortunately Nathan Brown and his family seems to have left Charlton no later than 1815. So anything beyond that date is not really relevant. These 2 people fit, and there were actually 1 or 2 more on the list time-wise, and so they were worth further consideration. Now I was very excited at this point because this David Brown family looked very possible. I did some research and I discovered that They did have a Nathan Brown who was born around the same time period as our Nathan Brown, and I thought, wow, this could be it, and I'm really hoping that Nathan can fit into that family. So I did a bit of research and I put it together in a family group sheet, and this is what I found out about David Brown. He's from a Brown family that originally comes from Waltham area in Massachusetts, and he married a woman named Mindwell Cummings. Now Cummings is a very prevalent name in Charlton, Mass, and interestingly enough, it's also a family name for Nathan Brown's wife, Molly. I believe it's her grandmother was a Cummings, so I thought, wow, this is very promising. And then I filled out the information on his family. He's got some children listed there. And I said, this is wonderful. It's all fitting together so nicely. I'm so excited. I'm hoping that this is really it. One thing you need to consider when you're doing brick wall research is naming patterns, or at least the use of hereditary names, family names within the families. And that's a huge part to figuring out whether your family is going to fit with another family. So I wanted to take a look at the David Brown family and compare it to Nathan Brown's family and see if I could find a fit. So David and Mindwell are the parents. Ebenezer, Huldah, Nathaniel, Jacob, and Elijah are the children. Now, the Nathaniel on the David Brown family should be the same person as the Nathan in the Nathan Brown family, okay? Because I'm trying to connect two families, and I'm trying to show that David would be Nathan's father. So you see, in the Nathan Brown family, we have Molly, Asa, Clark, Rebecca, Samuel, Allison, Frank, Ruth, and Charles. Wow, this is a problem. I really, really want my Nathan to fit into the David Brown family. Everything is just too perfect, you know, the Cummings connection, the proximity to Woodstock, it all fits so nicely. But I had to admit that by looking at this, not a single name matched. For this time period in the late 1700s, the early 1800s, it's fairly unheard of for somebody to not use a single family name. So in my gut, I knew that somehow this could not be Nathan Brown's family. So I thought, well, what can I do? I need to come up with another technique to try and figure out who his parents were. So I need to change strategies. I need to make sure that I don't force my ancestor, or Geoff's ancestor in this case, into a family that they don't belong to. You have to really resist the temptation to do that. And instead of trying to flip your ancestor into somebody else's family, turn it around and work with the names that you have. Okay, so here we have that same family group sheet of Nathan Brown and Molly Clark. Now we don't know who Nathan Brown's parents are, but we do know who Molly Clark's parents are. If you look at this, we can make some determinations here. First off, we've got Asa Clark Brown. Well, you don't have that information available to you on the screen, but we know that Asa Clark is Molly Clark's father. So that's pretty clear. The first child was named after her father. Number two, Rebecca Brown. Well, that happens to be Molly Clark's mother. Asa Clark married Rebecca Walker, and that's the parents of Molly Clark. So Rebecca, the second child, is named after Molly's mother. The third example that we have here is Allison Brown. That happens to be one of Molly's brothers. So right there, off the bat, we found three names within the family that belong to the Clarks. Also, we've established that this couple, Nathan and Molly, are using family names when naming their children. So we have 4 children left: Samuel Miller Brown, Frank Brown, Ruth Brown, and Charles. Could those be names associated with Nathan Brown? Now, Samuel Miller Brown is particularly interesting because he's got that middle name, similar to the way Asa Clark had 2 names used in that name. So perhaps that we can focus on Samuel Miller Brown as a way to solve this mystery. So what we're going